finally, the African summit that was convened in France on the 22nd and 23rd of June have come to an end. It was convened by Emmanuel Macron, where 14 heads of state in Africa were invited, with African billionaires and stakeholders were also invited to attend this summit. They were to sit down and look for a feasible way to tackle poverty and climate change. But of course, the whole agenda that is not publicized was the new Global Financial Pact that was signed by the 14 heads of state in Africa. And amongst the attendants were Paul Biya and the new president of Nigeria, Tinubu, were all asleep at some point during that conference. And you also have Cyril Ramaphosa and William Ruto of Kenya, who vigorously challenged the architecture that have been put in place post-World War II by the Western world to finance African states. Basically, the International Monetary Fund were set up by the Western countries to finance and govern financial policy in Africa post-World War II. So we know for sure that this meeting was announced right in 2022 by Emmanuel Macron after the G20 meeting where the Western government set aside 100 billion to finance poverty elevation measure across the continent and also to fight global warming. So all this meeting is taking place for Emmanuel Macron to basically present to African leaders what the G20 had decided for them, for their future. So we are going to go through these video footages that are coming from this conference. We had a wonderful presentation by the president of Kenya, and it was just all talks anyway, but we really appreciate William Ruto standing up for Africa and the presentation made by Ramaphosa of South Africa, which is really the highlight of those presentations which I want to bring to you.
Thank you very much, President Macron. Let me start off by saying, President Lula, don't worry. When we have the BRICS meeting, the issue of currency is top on the agenda. So we are going to discuss it. But I think what is important to many of us is that there should be solid consensus on the reform of the financial architecture of the world. Because without that reform, the dreams and the objectives that we have to address our challenges will not be realized.
So Cyril Ramaphosa is making a very powerful case for a reform of the architecture of the financial institutions that governs the world, in particularly Africa. The attempts to borrow money from the International World Bank. While calling on these reforms are very important, they are basically useless for African leaders to attempt to reform institutions where they don't hold any significant share in those institutions. Financial institutions are run by shareholders and people who contribute money into those financial institutions, and African states are all poor countries. Majority of them are highly indebted countries who can have no significant say in the international institutions that governs currency. Where we actually have leverage is our own currencies in Africa. They have floated the idea of developing a single currency for African states. The currency that was proposed by West African countries, the ECO, have also been sabotaged by Emmanuel Macron's effort through the president of Ivory Coast, who represents the French interest in Africa. So for African leaders, they just come to these meetings, they sit and deliberate on agenda that have been set for them by the G20. And those G20 members do not even see the need to come and face these African leaders, but they choose one of theirs, Emmanuel Macron, to come and read to the African leaders the agenda. And all African leaders they do is to sit there, complain and take no action of their own that can actually empower them to balance the gap between rich and poor countries. Muammar Gaddafi had proposed a single currency for Africa that is backed by gold. He was assassinated. The ECO that was proposed in West Africa was sabotaged by the French-speaking African countries. So Africans have to stop just going into these meetings and hoping that they can change anything. Of course, they can go there to beg for money, they can go there to seek for loans and to receive aid, but we should not deceive our people to expect anything good from these institutions. The IMF is not Africans' money, so we should stop expecting that the European or the Western people are going to change terms that will come for them to borrow money. That will never happen. That is not how China came out of poverty. That is not how China protected its own sovereignty. And that is not definitely how the Russians and the Indians are doing. For us Africans to come out of poverty, for our own countries and our own continent to emerge out of this poverty state, it is for our own leaders to sit amongst themselves, unite themselves, and look for a vision that is peculiar to our own condition. So let's listen to the speech made by...
Those reforms need to touch on a whole range of issues. Mr. Mo Ibrahim yesterday even spoke about something that we may think is insignificant, that the boards of directors of your multilateral institutions are not made up of independent directors. They're largely internal people or shareholders. So that in itself for us is an important reform. It's a game where we all need to be dealt with equity in an equitable manner. And there is a need for reform in that regard as well.
So these are the things we as Africans, we need to wake up to. We are tired of seeing our leaders going to complain about institutions they have no power over and can do absolutely nothing. It just makes us look like a laughing stock. I can just imagine Emmanuel Macron, Joe Biden, the president of Brazil, who is sitting there, looking at all these African leaders making these suggestions. It's like a client or somebody who opened an account in a bank going to tell the bank manager on how you run your bank. That is how it works. And African leaders just look so ridiculous every time they go into this institution and try to complain about the unfairness, asking these lenders to treat them as equal. How can a borrower be treated as equal as somebody who lends money? This is just ridiculous. And we know for sure that nobody can come out of poverty simply by just borrowing and borrowing. The only way for African countries to come out of poverty and to be able to challenge the international system in terms of building our own economic bloc, it is for true saving. It's just common sense. Save more money and stop wasting it as though it was a national cake, where African states just simply share their budget amongst the various tribes for people to indulge themselves with corruptions. African states have to use our natural resources as a basic investment for returns that will enable us to compete in the global system. But anyway, let's listen to what Ramaphosa has
The other important thing for this to happen, it will help us not to participate as unequal cousins in these institutions. It will help us to participate fully, and so that we don't have a sense that we are beggars, that we are being dealt with out of generosity. I think it's important in the new era that the world is in now that there should be a good measure of equality among sovereign nations. You know, recently...
So these are our African leaders who have traveled all the way, 14 of them, including all of our billionaires, to go and meet one European leader who represents the G20, for them to beg for money. As a matter of fact, the G20 have set aside 100 billion that is supposed to help alleviate poverty. But that money is not given as free money. It's also given as loans, where African countries will draw money from or borrow money from. So how can African leaders going to beg for money be demanded to be treated not as beggars? Because they are indeed going there to beg for money, beg for loans. And that is not what we have seen in Asia. That is not what we have seen in Latin America. Brazil did not develop its economy by going to take loans from the IMF. Neither did China, neither did the Vietnamese, neither did the people in Syria, in Singapore, or in Dubai. You develop your own country by managing the resources that you have judiciously, by trying to have physical balance and mobilizing your own people, your own human resources to develop the resources you have and trade in the international market. You don't develop a country just by simply borrowing money from abroad. It doesn't work that way. If Africans keep on relying on foreign aid and loans from the IMF and the International World Bank, they are going to continue to remain in the same state, because there is no way you can be better than somebody that lends you money. There's just no way. And we have to stop this. Africans have to realize the game that is going on and to be able to see our leaders for who they are. They are beggars. That way we can generate the incentive and economic capital to force our leaders to look inwardly and build economic infrastructure that can stand the challenge of modern day competition. Let's continue.
Now, I want to then talk about something very practical. President Sassou Nguesso raised it yesterday. He said he would be happy if, flowing from this summit, we do something very practical on the infrastructure side. Having said that 600 million people in Africa do not have electricity, and yet we've got all the resources to generate electricity, particularly the mighty Congo River, and that there have been plans to build a number of power stations that will generate, in my calculation, up to 70,000 megawatts. And he said, and I want to speak in support of this proposal, that to prove that these summits are not summits where we just talk, flowing from the Paris COP as well as others, let us now put money on the table and collectively say we are going to address this mega project. A mega project which will in the end generate electricity for up to 12, 15 African countries all at one go.
So these are actually the real challenges of Africa. We have all what it takes to come out from poverty. According to projects that have been in the Congo for the past 60 years, there have been feasibility studies that have proven that the river of Inga River in Congo, can produce electricity in Africa that can supply 15 African states with enough electricity for them to become developed in terms of their infrastructure and in terms of their industrial development. But that capital to set up those dams in the Congo will cost us about 80 billion US dollar. And those African states are now somehow thinking that the Europeans are going to come and pay for those projects for African leaders. It wouldn't happen that way. For the past 60 years, we have this mighty potential in Africa to end this issue of light shortages in our capitals, and our African states are unable to raise money or develop the technology themselves. So to develop those technology is so difficult for us Africans, we cannot even develop our own resources by our own self. So let me take you and share with you some of these video footages from Congo, from the Inga Falls that could potentially power the entire African continent with electricity. So these are some of the images of the mighty river Inga. This river is one of the deepest rivers in the world. It can provide electricity for over 15 African countries. But the African countries have not been able for the past 60 years to come together. Those states can actually come together, raise money, or even develop common sense methods to raise those falls into hydroelectric dams that can power our African economy. But they have not done so. So I want to show you how simple it is to build a dam that can generate hydroelectricity. So these dams are very easy to construct. They may sound very expensive because they are mega projects. We have the technology, South Africa have the technology, Nigeria have the technology to develop. Even the Congolese have engineers who have studied and have the technology to develop this dam into So this is just a simple technology on how you can generate hydroelectricity. Very easy. So this is a mini dam created by a farmer in China. This technology is available even in primary school. You can learn how to generate electricity and how to construct a dam like this. These are the images just to show you how ridiculous this situation is. So if you can develop this dam, we all know how to develop hydroelectricity. All the resources we have in Africa are there. The human resources, we have the engineer, we have everything. If we have to go and bring the white men to come and do it for us, or the Chinese, we are going to pay 80 billion. African engineers and states will produce cement, we produce everything that is needed to generate hydroelectricity in Africa. As a matter of fact, in Ethiopia, they have built a very huge dam, and they have this argument going on with Egypt. So it is very easy for us to solve our problems. The technologies are there. The manpower are there. The only thing we don't have is leaders who have the vision to carry out these projects. It takes is just for those 15 African countries that will benefit from hydroelectricity in the Congo to come together and decide and make up their mind that let us carry out this project. They can set aside just 1% of their budget, and they are going to be able to solve the problems that have been there for the past 60 years of hydroelectricity that will empower the entire African continent to be able to come out of poverty. Because you can never become a developed country without enough electricity power to power big industry or to attract big industry to invest in Africa. You can't do that. Back in Ghana, just to show you how far we have come from, it is not that we don't have this infrastructure. In Ghana, the Ghanaian economy in the 70s were building a nuclear power station. So Ghana, as you see it, over 20 years ago, had the technology, had the design, had the money to build a nuclear power that could power the entire Ghana economy and the entire Ivory Coast economy. But that project was stopped by the West, who came up with all sorts of new regulation in the international market to punish the Ghanaian government, who abandoned a project that was 60% complete. So I want to take you to Ghana. Let's go to this video footage for you to see. So these are footages from the abandoned nuclear station in Ghana. So it is not that we Africans, we cannot build it. If the Ghanaians could build a nuclear reactor that could power their economy in the 70s, definitely Africa have the technology. South Africa have a nuclear powered industrial complex that is powered by nuclear reactors. In South Africa, they do have that technology. They can build a nuclear station in Nigeria today if they want to solve Africa's electric problems. But the West will not allow them to do so with sanctions, regulations upon regulations, with intimidations and coup d'etat. So Africa have all the solutions for our problems. We have the solutions for our nuclear energy, for our electricity problems. We can be a developed country. Right now in Ghana, this particular site is closed for the public. They don't want Africans to even have the idea that we can develop hydroelectricity, we can develop nuclear electricity. We can do that. It's very easy. We have the most sophisticated engineers in the world. They are all working abroad because they don't want us to develop our own capacity back home. And who are you going to blame? Are you going to blame the West, who are just simply smart to be at the top of the game? We are going to blame our own African leaders for not taking the initiative and doing the right thing to salvage our own situation. All they want is cheap money, easy money to borrow money from the IMF, borrow money to come and pay. And this is very sad. And in Congo, for example, there is a huge oil deposit in the Congo. And instead for the Congolese government to come together, put its resources together and develop and extract energy resources, well, and sell in the global market, want to auction Congo want to auction their field because we have the biggest rainforest in Africa. second only after the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. So in Congo, so instead for the Congolese government to now gather its resources, its engineers, look for resources with other Africans, or even borrow money to exploit these resources in Congo, the Congolese government have decided to auction its own land. Tomorrow you will hear that China have bought over Congo. So let's watch these video footages.
The government launched the auction for 27 oil blocks and 3 gas blocks. And the 2 blocks is inside. And then that's why we are going there to talk with communities. People are afraid about how they will, they're asking about their land. They're thinking that they will lose their land.
So this is the rainforest in Congo, the biggest in the world. It has enormous gas resources. Instead of the Congolese government to gather money, gather its engineer, and try to exploit these resources, because we know that even in Nigeria, gangsters and criminal gangs exploit resources in the Delta region in Nigeria. They steal petrol from the soil and refine them and sell them out. You even have Dangote, a private citizen in Nigeria, have built a refinery in Nigeria. So for the Congolese government, instead to dig and exploit these resources, they want to auction the whole forest and look for quick money. According to estimate, it is worth over 600 billion. So they want to sell their own land and get quick money for other countries to come and exploit that land and make benefits and grow their own economy from the profits of the Congolese people. So when the Chinese or the Indians or the Americans or the Europeans will come and buy over this land, do you think they are going to care for the local people who live in this land? All this much land. I've been in Cambodia. Millions of people travel to Cambodia to see floating villages that they have in Congo, and it's undeveloped. We have huge potential for tourism. Some of the most rare apes are in Congo. Those areas are not even developed for tourism and make it accessible for people to travel there to Congo to enjoy these natural riches that the people in Congo have. But instead, the Congolese government want to sell their own land where there is petroleum there for the Western countries to come and take over. And they'll just take the money, go to Kinshasa and dance Congolese music with it. So it's very, very sad.
We have not heard anything from the government. Our life depends on the river. We think this will cause big problems. We need an explanation.
We all live in poverty. If this comes, it will help us to improve our lives.
So this is a problem we have in Africa. Lack of vision. Our leaders lack vision and they lack love for their people. They are just people, I don't know how I can describe them. How can a country and a continent so rich have so much poverty? All this area that these people are living in, if they were in Asia, they could have been developed into a touristic area where people will come there to pay money for those local people just to have fun there and to have a view of those forest area. But in Congo, it's a land of poverty. Now the government wants to sell that area. Do you think the foreign companies that are going to come there, they are going to care about our environment? No. So why our leaders are asking the West not to treat them like beggars, they are actually acting like beggars. We have all it takes to develop Africa. All we need are leaders that have visions, that love their people, that can mobilize their human resources. Nobody will do it for us. If we go and get money from the Chinese or get laborers from the Chinese, it will only make us to sink deep in this poverty. We are tired of seeing African migrants being killed in the seas above Libya because they want to try to look for better life in the West. All this madness in our continent have to stop. We need leaders with visions, and our people must be educated to expect something better than what they have. Because without the expectation from our own people, they will continue to be taken advantage of by leaders who have no vision. So we must develop our own interests. We must care about what is happening in other African countries, in the Congos, in Sierra Leone, in Kenya, and have high expectation so that our leaders will have the incentive to do what is right for our own people. Ciao. God bless you all.